So, as he continues to leave the chamber, Katie Simpson is standing by Capitol Hill, always in a really good spot. Katie, Canada got a mention for precisely tariffs, certainly got a few mentions.
Yeah, and if there had been some speculation from the Commerce Secretary, from Donald Trump's Commerce Secretary, that perhaps there could be some sort of easing of the tariffs, perhaps meeting Canada and Mexico sort of in the middle, what you heard from Donald Trump was a firm and fast commitment to tariffs. He believes it is a way to build jobs in America, to rebuild the manufacturing sector, and he really touted how it's going to be something that can help, generate wealth in the United States. He did specifically mention Canada, as you say, 4 times during this speech. Have a listen when he spoke about Canada and Mexico and the current battle that exists right now.
Much has been said over the last 3 months about Mexico and Canada, but we have very large deficits with both of them. But even more importantly, they've allowed fentanyl to come into our country at levels never seen before, killing hundreds of thousands of our citizens and many very young, beautiful people, destroying families. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. They are, in effect, receiving subsidies of hundreds of billions of dollars. We pay subsidies to Canada and to Mexico of hundreds of billions of dollars, and the United States will not be doing that any longer. We're not going to do it any longer.
There is so much to break down in that. So first of all, he sort of refers back to the initial premise that Donald Trump has put out there about what he says these tariffs are about, talking about fentanyl at the border. But then he sort of shifts and talks about this exaggerated claim he says about trade deficits, which he describes as a subsidy, which of course it is not. Canada has a trade surplus with the United States because it sells more energy products into the United States than goods that are sold into Canada. But if you take those energy products out there, the United States actually has a trade surplus with Canada. But that again is not, despite a number of Canadian officials expressing that and explaining that to the Trump administration, it's not necessarily something that has changed Donald Trump's perspective on this situation. And throughout this speech, we've heard him say a number of things that are not factually correct, and that sort of fits in line with that. Now, at one point, we did hear some pushback from Democrats when Donald Trump was warning Americans that there could be some uncomfortable moments, that particularly Americans are going to have to bear with the administration as this process goes forward. Remember, it's American companies that pay the tariffs. These tariffs are going to cause some short-term economic pain when it comes to the costs at the grocery store, when it comes to costs for big-ticket items, when it comes to the cost of gas, those kinds of things. Have a listen to what Donald Trump said about that, warning Americans. You can't really hear the Democrats exactly what they say when they're pushing back, but they pushed back when Donald Trump warned that Americans are going to have to deal with this.
Tariffs are about making America rich again and making America great again, and it's happening, and it will happen rather quickly. There'll be a little disturbance, but we're okay with that. It won't be much. No, you're not. Oh. And look where Biden took us, very low, the lowest we've ever been.
So Donald Trump really firmly sticking to his tariff plan, at least that's what it appeared to be in that speech tonight. His Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick had said earlier in the day perhaps that Donald Trump would be willing to meet with Canada and Mexico and sort of meet them in the middle, as he says, when it comes to the actual tariff rate. But Howard Lutnick had sort of suggested the last couple of days that the tariffs might not be as high as Donald Trump initially threatened, and then of course they were. So again, you've got one official saying one thing, but the president saying something else. At the end of the day, it's President Trump's decisions.
Yeah, and Katie, this is a situation where there are a lot of people who claim to have the president's ear. And I think it's been confusing for Canadian officials to know who to talk to, because so many people say, I'll talk to him. But as you say, you can talk to Donald Trump all you want. He will do precisely what he wants to do. What else stood out to you? I know you were taking furious notes. I think we all were. But what really stood out to you?
Just certainly the combative nature of this speech, the protests from Democrats. They're not just that moment with the one Democrat from Texas. There were times we heard boos and jeers and heckling from Democrats. There was one point where a number of Democrats wearing resist t-shirts stood up and left the chamber, and others left early. We saw Bernie Sanders walk past us well before the speech actually came to a close. So you saw those sort of acts of protest in the chamber, and largely it was a speech that is very familiar to the kind of speech that Donald Trump delivered during the election campaign. He spoke about his grievances. He complained about Donald Trump, spoke about how he feels he was unfairly treated by the justice system. Those kinds of things that really rally his base, that helped get him elected. And so he enjoys these moments. You can really tell when he was sort of being combative with Democrats. He seemed to enjoy that. It was a very partisan speech. We saw that Democrats would not cheer, would not clap, would not sort of engage other than those pushback moments. And so it was very much a typical Donald Trump speech. It sounds very similar to what he says on what he said on the campaign trail, and very typical to what he's been saying lately in the Oval Office, litigating those grievances. One thing I will note, I know you're going to be speaking about it with Margaret, but when Donald Trump started talking about some of those expansionist ideas, that also really stood out to me, because I was wondering, he talked about taking back the Panama Canal. He talked about taking Greenland. He used some different language there, but he talked about those things. And when he's talked about those things in the past, he's often spoken about Canada becoming the 51st state. He didn't do that tonight. I took note of that. But certainly what Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has said today about, his concern that Donald Trump is trying to severely hurt the Canadian economy to make it easier to annex. Those are worries that are very serious in Canada in this moment. And so, of course, our ears are listening for anything that could sort of lean into that. The only thing that really stood out, though, in terms of that, that important thing for Canada, Donald Trump is really standing firm for tariffs. And I think that's the really big takeaway in this moment for at least the Canadian audience.
Yeah, you bet. We're going to have lots more to talk about, Katie. More fact-checking to come, too. So we'll get back to you shortly. But as you talk about, Panama and Greenland, it's a good time to bring back CBC News senior international correspondent Margaret Evans. Now, just for some initial thoughts, Katie was talking about Panama and Greenland. Why don't we, just so that bring everybody up to speed, why don't we play a little bit of what Donald Trump said about Greenland, and then we'll talk about it.
And by the way, we're going to have growth in the auto industry like nobody's ever seen. Plants are opening up all over the place. Deals are being made. Never seen. That's a combination of the election win and tariffs. It's a beautiful word, isn't it? That, along with our other policies, will allow our auto industry to absolutely boom. It's going to boom. Spoke to the majors today, all three, the top people, and they're so excited. In fact, already numerous car companies have announced that they will be.
Okay, so that had nothing to do with Panama or Greenland, but just checking to make sure you're paying attention. I know you are, Margaret. What did you think about, it took a while before he started talking about Ukraine, or any country other than Mexico and Canada. What did you make when you heard him talk about we will take Greenland one way or another?
Yeah. You and I started out ahead of the speech, and I, said I thought that European diplomats would certainly be staying up all night to watch this speech, because they will be wanting clues. They have pundits consistently saying, don't take him at his word, or don't not take him at his word, because he's actually going to do what he says. So, any clue that they could kind of glean from today's address, I think, there would be a lot of attention on this, but he was extremely glancing. And what he did say, we've already heard, as you said, with Greenland, he began by saying, we respect people's right to determine their own sovereignty, but, we're going to do a deal. We're going to get them one way or another. He talked also about the Middle East and the Abraham Accords, which are his great prize in his mind, of something that championed in his first presidency. There was no mention of his, claim that he's going to take Gaza and turn it into the Riviera, even though we know today that Arab countries were meeting in Cairo and Egypt. They put forward an alternative plan to Donald Trump's plan in terms of how to deal with Gaza, how it would be governed, and how you would rebuild the Strip without displacing 2 million Palestinians. no mention of that, just great things happening in the Middle East. And with the Ukraine, again, he repeated things we've already heard. He consistently has exaggerated the amount of money that American dollars that America has sent to aid Ukraine when compared to the European Union's. So not a lot new there. The Panama Canal, there was a little bit more detail in that he was talking about two American companies, taking over two ports. Those companies, American companies based in Hong Kong, so under Chinese legislation in a sense. That was interesting. That was a little bit more detail. But, if somebody was staying up looking for a clue, I guess the overall message in that, if they were to take one, is that it really was about America first. This is not a country overly concerned on any level with its partners, and they will have been watching for what he was saying about Canada, because he's threatened Europe, the European Union, with similar trade tariffs. He said they're coming their way. And again, that might be the strongest message, is that there was a clear, defense of his path forward in terms of imposing those tariffs. And there was no suggestion that he seems prepared to back down, change, or negotiate, or some of the things that Katie was talking about.
Your reference to what he didn't say about Gaza is interesting, because a lot of people, of course, he had said earlier that he would turn Gaza into the Riviera of the Middle East, and there's been all these images, these AI images out of Donald Trump on a lounge chair at the edge of the Mediterranean in Gaza, and knowing that there is an alternative proposal out there, some people will say perhaps that was the point, right? That perhaps he would offer something so outrageous that it would frighten other actors to offer something potentially rational or acceptable. And so for him, perhaps his work is done there, maybe.
It's possible. I mean, I think we'll have to wait and see. One of the other unmentionables, or things that he didn't mention about the Middle East, is the fact that they're stuck between, he talked about, we're getting our hostages out.
Right.
There's, Israel is again stopping aid from getting into the Gaza Strip, which was a big part of phase one of this very fragile ceasefire. They haven't moved on to phase two, which they should have done by now. So, it's hard to say. Again, it comes down to people kind of saying, he's the great negotiator, he's got a plan, an ultimate plan, and that, okay, he's forced the Arab world to do something. Mm-hmm. They may well have done it in any case. I mean, they're certainly not going to sit back and allow what Donald Trump was proposing to happen, but yeah, a lot of things not mentioned.
A glancing reference, that's interesting. When you talk about tariffs, how the European Union will be paying attention to that, the section that they will probably be paying attention to is a pretty crunchy one, where he talks about details. So why don't we play that in full and have a good listen here.
If you don't make your product in America, however, under the Trump administration, you will pay a tariff, and in some cases, a rather large one. Other countries have used tariffs against us for decades, and now it's our turn to start using them against those other countries. On average, the European Union, China, Brazil, India, Mexico, and Canada, have you heard of them? And countless other nations charge us tremendously higher tariffs than we charge them. It's very unfair. India charges us auto tariffs higher than 100%. China's average tariff on our products is twice what we charge them. And South Korea's average tariff is 4 times higher. Think of that, 4 times higher. And we give so much help militarily and in so many other ways to South Korea, but that's what happens. This is happening by friend and foe. This system is not fair to the United States and never was, and so on April 2nd, I wanted to make it April 1st, but I didn't want to be accused of April Fool's Day. That's not, just one day cost us a lot of money. But we're going to do it in April. I'm a very superstitious person. April 2nd, reciprocal tariffs kick in. And whatever they tariff us, other countries, we will tariff them. That's reciprocal, back and forth. Whatever they tax us, we will tax them. If they do non-monetary tariffs to keep us out of their market, then we will do non-monetary barriers to keep them out of our market. There's a lot of that, too. They don't even allow us in their market. We will take in trillions and trillions of dollars and create jobs like we have never seen before. I did it with China and I did it with others, and the Biden administration couldn't do anything about it because there was so much money they couldn't do anything about it. We have been ripped off for decades by nearly every country on earth, and we will not let that happen any longer. Much has been said over the last 3 months about Mexico and Canada, but we have very large deficits with both of them. But even more importantly, they've allowed fentanyl to come into our country at levels never seen before, killing hundreds of thousands of our citizens and many very young, beautiful people, destroying families. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. They are, in effect, receiving subsidies of hundreds of billions of dollars. We pay subsidies to Canada and to Mexico of hundreds of billions of dollars, and the United States will not be doing that any longer. We're not going to do it any longer.
So we want to head back now to Katie Simpson, who, in classic Katie Simpson fashion, just cornered Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick.
Yeah, and I believe we've actually just shared the tape with our colleagues in the control room, our colleagues in Ottawa, and our colleagues in Washington, D.C. So control room, do let me know if we can get some of that turned around. It's a 7-minute, don't have it yet, so it's a 7-minute little Q&A session that we got with him. So basically, he was speaking with reporters, and my colleague Sylvia spotted him, so I just ran over there with my iPhone, because you're not allowed to move your camera to the sort of line where people are walking through. So I asked him, number one, is there any sort of wiggle room for the tariff rate to be lower on Canada, or what's sort of going on behind the scenes right now? And he said to me that that's going to be a conversation for tomorrow. He thinks that there is some room. He made the suggestion that Canada keeps offering more things to the United States in terms of hoping to get to some sort of agreement to get out of these tariffs. I asked him for some specifics on that. I'm like, well, what do you mean? He's like, oh, well, the details are being discussed. He's like, more to make the border better. And so I asked him, what is it specifically you are looking for? The president himself has said all of these different things about what it is he's irritated about with Canada when it comes to the trading relationship, when it comes to defense spending, when it comes to all kinds of things. He's made a whole range of complaints. And so I asked Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, what is it exactly that you want? And then he went to make his point about fentanyl, which is the official line of the Trump administration. That's the legal justification they're using to impose these tariffs. And so he stuck to that very closely, making claims about the Canadian border, the northern border, and the southern border. There's no distinction from the Trump administration about any sort of difference in sort of like the size of the issue, the size of the problem. And then some other reporters were able to ask some questions as well, and he just talked about more broadly when it comes to dealing with, trade reciprocity. But I was able to get a couple more questions in there, and I asked him, the president himself has said all of these different kinds of things about what it is he wants from Canada. Is that not a factor in what's going on with these tariffs that come into effect, that are in effect now? And he's like, nope, that's April 2nd. All of those trade issues, those big picture irritants, those are going to be dealt with April 2nd. So even if there is a little bit of room in this moment for Canada, some kind of agreement or some sort of easing of a tariff, remember, additional tariffs come into effect on March 12th on steel and aluminum. That is going to have a big impact on Canada as well. And then there's the potential for even more blanket tariffs on all U.S. trading partners, including Canada. The exact specifics are still being worked out because trade officials are studying the irritants in the relationship, and they're coming up with different rates they'd like to see with every other country. This is what Trump refers to as the reciprocal tariffs. It got a shout out in his speech today. Now, I did ask Howard Lutnick whether what he thought about the Prime Minister's comments today, and I specifically asked, I said, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau today said that Donald Trump is trying to weaken the Canadian economy in order to make it easier to annex the country. And Howard Lutnick sort of laughed off that suggestion to say, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is in the final days of his time as Prime Minister, and sort of brushed off like that. But of course, the sentiment in Canada in this moment is that that is a deep concern. I also asked him, I asked him about, Canadians in this moment. They're very angry because that is something that, so many Canadians, no matter what industry they work in, no matter what they do, they're watching what's going on here, and the relationship with Canada's closest ally deteriorating before everyone's eyes. And he said to me something along the lines of, we're going to have to get that tape, because I asked that question. You know what, Adrian? I don't remember what he said. I forgot. But we're going to get that tape on the air, and we'll show it all to you. Anyway.
That's all right. You believe in accuracy, so we'll hear it from the man himself.
There you go. Let's hear it from him.
All right. Yeah. Katie Simpson, thanks very much. So Donald Trump promised manufacturing revival tonight, claiming that tariffs will fuel an auto industry boom. And he also issued a warning: if companies don't build in the United States, they'll pay the price. Have a listen.
And by the way, we're going to have growth in the auto industry like nobody's ever seen. Plants are opening up all over the place. Deals are being made. Never seen. That's a combination of the election win and tariffs. It's a beautiful word, isn't it? That, along with our other policies, will allow our auto industry to absolutely boom. It's going to boom. Spoke to the majors today, all three, the top people, and they're so excited. In fact, already numerous car companies have announced that they will be building massive automobile plants in America, with Honda just announcing a new plant in Indiana, one of the largest anywhere in the world. And this has taken place since our great victory on November 5th, a date which will hopefully go down as one of the most important in the history of our country. If you don't make your product in America, however, under the Trump administration, you will pay a tariff, and in some cases, a rather large one.
Okay, so let's bring in Peter Armstrong now, also in Washington. You're our senior business correspondent. We need to talk business here. When Donald Trump says there will be a little disturbance in the United States, how big will it be, and is that sinking in, do you think, for Americans?
I think it will be more than a little. I think it'll be quite big. And no, I don't think it's really begun to sink in for most Americans at all. And it won't until it happens. And what we saw tonight at several points, especially around tariffs, is that this whole tariff policy is replete in contradictions. And those contradictions are perhaps no more obvious in any industry than they are in the auto industry. He's right. Honda did just make this amazing announcement, and he should be happy about that. He's drawing more investment into the United States and away from Canada and Mexico by injecting all of this uncertainty into the economic landscape of those two countries. He wants to see that happen. That's a good thing. But if Honda was to open that plant this week, it would be facing the same limitations on its ability to operate that every other auto plant in the country, and in fact in North America, is facing, that the entire industry is built on the notion that if you guys build the parts and make them more efficient there, and you guys are good at that, we can build this up here, and that we can move those seamlessly through three countries over spans of kilometers of shipping and get them there just in time to build. We can bring down the cost of building cars better than perhaps anywhere else in the world, or many places in the world. That was the promise of the North American auto industry, the North American Auto Pact. Donald Trump is trying to undo that. That's his right. But to say that it will be good for the auto industry and that it will boom like never before is an obvious contradiction. The same thing he said about farmers. He was saying how he's done and is going to do great things for farmers. You talk to farmers and they say, well, yeah, this will be great for domestic. But the amount of grain that has been shipped from the United States out into the world just in the last 20 years or so, Adrian, has absolutely exploded. It's gone from like $50 billion in 1998 to $175 billion in international exports just in the last few years. So those farmers, sure, they can do better in continental North America, but the global and international markets that they've grown to are going to be suddenly closed off when retaliatory tariffs kick in. And the last time this exact thing happened and retaliatory tariffs were put in on American agricultural exports, the United States government of Donald Trump had to introduce a $30 billion bailout package for farmers impacted by those retaliatory tariffs. So like I say, it is just replete with contradictions. He seems to navigate those contradictions quite seamlessly. But the people in those industries and his supporters are going to have to reckon with them as these tariffs continue to bite. We'll see if there's a deal tomorrow. But if there isn't, they will bite, and they'll bite awful quick.
But there's a solid chance what his supporters will take away from tonight on tariffs is the line he issued, which is that tariffs will make America rich, make Americans rich again.
He believes it, and they believe it. And it flies in the face of all the evidence we have. We know, we can simply pull up the studies done by the U.S. government about what happened in 2018. And you and I have talked about this so many times that I kind of feel like I'm repeating myself. But an old editor of ours once said, you don't make a hit record playing it just one time. So indulge me this story one more time. Back in 2018, they slapped tariffs on steel. The steel industries did great. The cost of steel went up. They hired people. They added about 1,000 jobs to the steel industries in 2018. On all the industries that use steel to make stuff, their price went up, their input costs went up. They had to lay off workers. 75,000 people in those industries lost their jobs and took years to recover from the chaos that came with the disruption to the supply chain. That plays itself out. That's just one small fraction of the tariffs that were introduced this morning at midnight last night. That was just steel and aluminum, and we saw all the obvious impacts and all the stories that economists have been telling us since the Smoot-Hawley tariffs in 1930, they all came true. This time we're talking about these sweeping tariffs against everything coming into the United States. So the case studies will just be, we'll be tripping over them. There will be so many, and they will happen quickly. We saw a lot of people trying to front run these tariffs of importing a ton of goods before the tariffs kicked in. That'll only buy you so much time. The pain that comes with rising the cost of anything is going to be felt by people that use that product right across the country.
One last thought to you, Peter. We talk about the markets all the time because for Donald Trump, they are akin to a popularity poll.
Yeah.
Today, tonight, the futures, the morning opening up in Asia, what do you see?
Listen, the markets have, and again, we've talked a lot about this, but just to make the point abundantly clear, markets shrugged off all of the threats of tariffs. They simply didn't react. Investors didn't believe him. They thought this was just a threat. Much like he said he was going to make Mexico pay for the wall in his first term, they took the same sort of rhetoric and said he's just talking about tariffs. He's not actually going to do it. Nobody, they'd be crazy to do that. It would crush the economy. And then it happened. And when he announced that they were going to happen yesterday, you saw markets fall off a cliff, and they continued to fall through the day today. They tried to pose a little bit of a rally around midday, and then even that fell off because they realized the impact this is going to have. Tariffs will drive up prices, they will drive up unemployment, they will drive down economic growth, and they will eventually bite into profits. And that's a problem for investors, it's a problem for stock markets, but it's a problem for regular Americans right across the country as well.
All right, Peter Armstrong in Washington, thank you.
You bet.